Hi gang, welcome to the new semester. This should be rather interesting. Business continuity and disaster recovery is always on the forefront of every single CIO or manager's mindset. It's the rule of thumb I always said to employees of mine was the first rule of business continuity is be prepared. Not only be prepared, constantly test and retest your plan, run scenarios you don't think will ever happen. Anything from a death to a fire to a bomb threat or a cyber attack. You never know what's going to happen. The more prepared and the more challenged your employees are to handle disasters, the more you're able to change your business continuity plans and be prepared for a disaster and actually reduce stress and make sure everyone is happy. And that's one of the key rules, happiness and keeping business rolling. So business continuity, if we think about it as a method or a term, is used as a way to create and validate a plan for continuous operation before, and during, and after an interruption. If you're not planning ahead of time and testing ahead of time your plan, you can't find the faults. It's just like user task analysis. If we look at a website, once you build something, the first thing you do is you go to the users and you ask them, what do you think? And you have them run through it. If they're doing too many clicks, if the colors are frustrating, if the functionality is wrong, if they can't see the text, you change it. You do this right away to make a better understanding of the vehicle that you're using, the idea, the concept, the model. And that's what this idea as a business continuity is, a constant revision of the model that you use to help save yourself in a disaster situation before it happens, so that you have a plan for continuously running and backing up and keeping the business operations without interruptions so that your clients or your contracts are held up and you're not in a disruption mode. So the first thing is always keeping in mind, how do we keep the organization running? What are the potential risks to stop it from running? What is a threat that might happen or an outage? This could happen on a business line. If you're working for Ford, maybe it's a power outage where the line won't physically run and they can't build cars. What do? Well, there's always a fail-safe backup that they can use hand-cranked operations to where it's fingertip push on cranes a lot of times for them to be able to use the same system, but a human can actually push along the body of the car and still keep manufacturing. At Sony plant, I was at many of times we looked at the business continuity of how they were building TV sets. They had a system where everything ran on tracks and everybody had their job. And if the system went down, because it was timed how much time each employee would go through, it was simple enough. The guy in the end would grab the set that's off, put it in a box, and he would go to the beginning of the line because everybody was trained to do everyone's job. So they continuously moved one piece to the next, to the next, to the next, without having to worry about automation or stoppage. So disaster recovery is really the idea of business flow, the immediate impact of dealing with an event or an action. And there's sort of three stages to this. One, stop the effects of the action. Try to curtail it. Sometimes you can't. You have to wait for them to subside. It might be a flood in a business, which I'll talk about in a minute. The second is addressing the aftermath. And the third is evaluate the best methods to keep the process going and moving and get yourself back on track. A small company had helped design an idea for Stelrite Industries. These people had a wonderful business in a small creek that went by their facility. Amazingly, the workers were all grateful for their jobs and able to recover the business flow within a matter of day to 2 days. The flood actually took out the business, but they had a great plan in place in case of a flood. The first thing they do is they get the equipment safe. They get the data stored in the computers, which was already stored high in the upstairs offices. The machines are already built up with legs so that if floodwater came, it would be underneath them. So the only thing that the people had to do is recover the actual business operation floors, where they cleaned up the wet water and the mud. They took anything that was of a stress value to the employees and got rid of it, or cleaned the parts and pieces that could be cleaned and saved immediately and got the process rolling again. But a good continuous plan was already in effect for the fact if there was a disaster, that they ran drills and thought about this type of idea. In business, there's really three key things you need to think about. It's the people, the process, and the technology. And a good plan for business continuity I use BCDR all the time, disaster recovery plans, have a planning phase and implementing phase is what most models ask. I always told people that they should have a recycling phase. I use the term recycling because once you have a plan and once you implement it, you should always look back and try to find ways to test that and recycle the plan and start over anew before something happens. Pretending that something happens, recycling plans, saying, okay, that doesn't work already because of this, this, and this, is a great way to become more efficient and safer and reduce stresses to any employees. One of the interesting facts I found is almost 80% of data loss is human error. Only 20% is natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, floods. So that gives you a pretty good thought process about how you should plan first, then for the other natural disasters. So the planning phases have a lot of different ideas to them, and people will have different ideas of what they can build into them. But number one is usually determining what the business status is. Something happens, you have to determine where you are. Can you function? Is everything ruined? Do we have partial abilities to work? Can we relocate this machinery and keep moving while building half of the part or half of the code? Can we put our employees in another safe haven? These steps are things that you have to start thinking about to determine a plan. One of the biggest parts is once you determine them, what alternatives could you consider? Can you utilize a fire station if you're a computer company to move some of your off-site equipment together and work out of a facility like that? Can you ask for a safe haven in a high school gym to get your plant running so that you could do parts or whatever the project is and have it all being assembled there? You have to determine these vulnerabilities and see which ones are the weakest and which ones are the biggest and how to navigate around the biggest ones first. The same goes with threats. If you have immediate threat of a flood happening again because of potential rains coming through, you would obviously want to be able to do some type of recovery. We're getting machinery, getting computers and hardware out of the situation to where they could get damaged further. Or maybe you want to build some sand walls, which we've seen a lot of times happen. In California, you always see the wildfires happening, and the first thing they do is they look at the immediate threats ahead of where the fire could go if the wind shifts, have people relocated, businesses relocated, all the key ingredients, other data is backed up and taken out of facilities. And then we have to think about the plan through a reviewing process. Most of the times a great plan is only great if it's gone through who actually uses the plans to get things rolling again. They're the people who understand the functionality of whether or not something's going to work or going to fail. Just because you are the manager, you don't understand the stresses your employees go through or the comforts they need to do their job correct. Little things mean a lot to where you might not think chairs are important in an office space that you could get away with sitting on a milk crate, but have you ever tried to sit on a milk crate for 4 or 5 hours and type code or do anything? It's very hard. The other thing is you have to think about the stakeholders. You have to come up with a plan to keep them informed so they want to stay with your business and know that you're going to be back on track. The people are always the number one key for me. First thing is first. Everybody has to be safe. There's no piece of equipment worth a life. Years ago, Ford Motor Company had a product called the Pinto, and it had a part in the gas tank, a bolt that was reversed in production, which caused when the vehicle was struck behind it to explode because it forced the bolt into the gas tank, caused a spark, and the vehicle would explode. Ford unfortunately looked at the cost of a human life and they determined it was $250,000 at the time. And he decided it would be better than recalling this part and changing the simple bolt around in a direction because it would be higher cost than the value of a human life, and they figured they could suffer through around 10 accidents and deaths. This isn't a very good plan. One of the biggest things we'll talk about too is Tylenol and how extra strength Tylenol was found to have cyanide. The first thing Tylenol did with the great plan was notify all of its stakeholders and retailers to pull all the material off the shelf, put out public notices immediately They saw a gross amount of losses of over 350 million in sales, but because of the strategic plan for communication and crisis control, they were able to put out this message and make people feel confident and less stressed that the product would resume, and when it did, it would be 100% safe. This safe message brought back 90% return within 4 years for that business and saved it. So a lot of times you have to think about crisis communication control. Who's your spokesperson? You should have one voice, one outlet, so that you're not having a business loss just because of workers or employees giving out misinformation. You also have to think about how to compensate workers, because if they're out of work, they're stressed and you may lose your key people. You have to try to come up with a plan to make everyone happy and work with it. And this should be part of it. And telling individuals the focus should be on the business, continuing the process, is a great way to eliminate pessimists and get that negative Nancy's out of the company, or get their mindsets to change. If you have people focused on a plan, that they've practiced a plan for disasters, then everything should run smoothly. This is why, if you think about an elementary school, what did we do? We always did fire drills 3-4 times a year. We'd probably never seen a fire when you were in school. I never did. But you knew exactly what to do, who to line up behind, how to walk out single file, where to go in the parking lot to be counted for, so everybody was safe. Did we need to do this plan 4 or 5 times a semester, a year? Probably not. But because of that repetitive model, they were able to find problems or associations that should be incorporated into the plan to make sure people are safer and have less threat upon them. Process is one of the most interesting parts too. The process that I think is left out a lot is the reduction of stress on people. People is what makes everything happen. And the number one way to reduce stress is have a chain of command for a communication channel for everyone. A lot of times we can't use this through technology if we have a power outage or if there's a flood or a hurricane. So there has to be an outlet, whether it's calling the local media and using them to put out a message to your workers, or the radio or newspapers, or maybe you have an internal possible way that you can do a phone chain like they used to do in the old days when snow was called at the schools. Mothers would call each mother and let them know the school was canceled. No matter what, there should be fail-safes for communication, and not just 1, 2, but 3 or 4 levels to make sure that process will happen. Because the number one way to reduce ambiguity and stress is by making sure everybody's informed. There should be a documented chain of command for leadership, so everybody knows who's in charge and who's going to be doing the speaking, who's going to be doing the orchestrating, who's going to say yes to the plan and no to the plan. There should be documented steps on that, on a new location, and how to start it up and how to move material if you're going to do this, where the power is, everything from what you will need in a backup supply. There should also always be post-disaster scenario tests of your plan. What happened? Go back over and analyze the plan of what happened, what failed, what was good, what further threats did you have. And when you have this post-disaster plan in place, you should test it, throw it at it. This is why you see in the Navy and different military aspects constant revision of plans. On the Navy ships, they have constant fire patrol and fire disaster drills, to where each time they have a different scenario. It might be a cook catches the grills on fire to a plane catches on fire. It's constant revision, constant update on the plan, and looking for problems and issues to adjust it, so if a disaster happens, the process can be smooth, quick, and effective to get business back in motion. Another thing you should always remember is you should think about the stakeholders. They're the ones that are important. They have the investments in your product, your business. They should always be communicated to effectively and immediately, ensuring them the business will continue, that you will get back up, and updating them for a time and a plan, and letting them know your plan for continuing business. When I worked years ago for a university in Pennsylvania, there was an unfortunate off-campus shooting where a student lost his life. But we had a strict plan about educating and getting people safe. And our first thing was communicate there's a threat on campus or right outside of campus, that all students should stay in their dorms and lock down the doors. Teachers should lock down doors. Buildings should be shut down. The police are immediately out in the streets. If they're on campus, they could help or go off campus if need be, but the number one priority is protecting all the students, the faculty, and staff. The plan was immediately processed, and it ended up being the safest way to make sure that no other person got hurt. Even though the accident happened off campus, we took charge, and the process plan was anything that was close to the university was considered an immediate threat that could come on campus and cause greater danger. And so the process was in place immediately upon a threat, even in a remote or a closed vicinity. So technology is always an interesting conundrum. You can never have enough backups. You can never have enough off-site or third-party vendors backing your material up, because one of them could go down if you're in the same grid. Think about it. Remember back when New York City lost all of its power a few years ago? What happened? Every single business in New York and Manhattan had no power, so all the backup stages for every single business, even if it was off-site, was most of them had on the other side of town. So nobody had business continuity. They didn't think about the whole entire Manhattan going down. They only thought about blocks going down, or certain buildings going down. So thinking about continuity becomes making sure your plan has technology backed up in multiple areas and multiple methods. Today we use cloud servers, which location becomes less of a threat, but there should also be hard backup and off location. You never know when disasters such as a fire is going to take place and could ruin all your on-site. You have to be able to way to extract that data quickly and fast and on a new location to get business moving again. And again, updating stakeholders, making stress reduction, making sure everybody is communicated about what the technology plan is and what the stages of the plan are. There are many different types of disasters, and a lot of times we only think of a disaster as a cyber attack today. But think about natural hazards like tsunamis, as happened recently. Hurricane Katrina just annihilated the South. Cold weather can shut down any area of the country for days. We saw D.C. stop again this year, and last year and a few years before, to where production was stopped on the political end. All the streets were closed. Same in New York City. Hot weather can cause floods and flash floods. Flood out roads, your trucks can't get through, your people can't get to work, or droughts might happen to where you never know. Something like farming is shut down. Commerce stops in that area because they can't grow corn maybe this year, which causes an increase in costs for everything from ethanol to food production. And it may trickle down to business, to yours. Forest fires and urban fires are always a threat. California, we've seen a lot of the wildfires and how they have to plan for that. Geological hazards such as volcanoes don't happen very often, but when they do, you have to plan for this if your business may be disrupted by it. For example, U.S. Airlines was disrupted in the last volcano that happened in Hawaii. They had many of people trapped inside the hotels. There on site that were from the United States and couldn't get back. So they had to come up with a contingency plan for helping people until they could get them out, because the planes couldn't fly through the smoke, which lasted for some people almost 3 weeks. Human-caused hazards are one of the biggest issues today. Unfortunately, we have terrorism, and that's one of the key aspects of cyber attacks, and thinking about what could happen. You never know how or when, but you have to put that plan in attack. We never know when someone's going to steal our data or infiltrate our system, so you have to have a conscious plan for recovering from those disasters or protecting. Arson is another one, or bomb threats. Think about what a bomb threat could do if your company is located in a building in New York City today. It's immediate evacuation of your building, which stops all processes. But if you have a plan in place where your employees are to walk out and move to a safe location with their laptops, they can continue working. These are all things that can happen. Protests such as Anonymous are always interestingly taking place today. They stop business. They will do ethical, as they call it, cyber attacks in a lot of cases. but it harms a business plan. So you have to prepare for something like this to protest your business if something goes awry. Disaster recovery and business continuity is a big new field. A lot of laws are being enacted, such as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, to ensure that data is being protected. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act happened in the early 2000s, where it said that anyone working with financial institutions had to have all their information backed up and secured from threats. So today's disaster recovery business plans also has to incorporate governance and laws. We're going to look a little bit more of that, and I know a lot of you had law and ethics class you should for this, and so it's a little bit of a touch on that idea. But on the next lecture, we'll move a little bit ahead. I look forward to seeing some of your discussion points this week. And think about risk assessment in this while you're talking amongst yourselves in your discussions. Assessment's always has a way to be measured. If you read the book by Hubbard, How to Measure Anything, it'll help you in thoughts about planning for disasters, planning for anything, or measuring the potential of risks that you or your company or maybe your family would be after too. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.